St. Augustine, Florida. Founded in 1565, it is the oldest city in the United States, adorned with magnificent European architecture. St. Augustine has endured both Spanish and British rule in her colorful past, and even today still leaves us with wonderful reminders of just how strategically important this seacoast area was to the Europeans in their military conquest attempts to dominate its possession. However, not surprisingly, despite the rich culture and immense history here, lie centuries-old stories of ghosts and their sightings, as well as overwhelming hauntings that still prevail even today. One of the most notable of landmarks in St. Augustine is the old lighthouse, which itself is not immune to stories of actual sightings of ghosts that continue to roam the grounds here. Not only do the spirits of the dead occupy the lighthouse itself, but the lighthouse keeper's dwelling at the base of the lighthouse below.
The St. Augustine Lighthouse has several ghosts. We have some in the keeper's house, which is the little house in front, and also in the tower. The main one that is most well known and most people ask about is the little girl. And she is seen upstairs mostly in the keeper's house on the top floor, what used to be the bedrooms. And it's not anymore, but that's mostly where she's seen. And usually late at night or really early in the morning when people are out here, because the grounds are always open. And they look up at the house because it's really pretty and they want to check it out, and they'll see a figure in the top floor, usually about so tall, and she has long dark hair and is wearing an old style white dress, and she's seen often looking out the window, and or some people have even seen her when they're up there, but that was long ago before it turned into a museum, when it was actually a house and people lived there. There were some people that were visiting, and they were staying in one of the bedrooms, and the guest woke up in the middle of the night and saw a young figure, a young girl, at the foot of his bed, and he just kind of looked at her for a minute, and then she disappeared. And supposedly she also knocked on his door one day. I'm not sure if it was the same guest or a different one, but someone knocked on the door, and he opened the door, and there was a young girl standing there as well with a long white dress on and long dark hair, and then she just kind of disappeared. And there are things that happen in the museum that we blame on her. Locks lock and unlock, footsteps are heard but there's nobody there, things are moved around, and we know that we put them somewhere when we leave at night, and then we come in the morning and it'll be somewhere different. So we blame that on her because it's something that a young child might do. And the other ghosts are, we have what we think are light keepers in the tower, and they're more experienced than they are seen. And mostly we smell cigar smoke in the base of the tower, and also up near the top is what's called the keeper's watch room, and that's where they stood or sat to watch the ships passing by in the ocean and keep an eye on everybody, make sure everything was going okay. And sometimes you smell cigar smoke up there, sometimes down in the base near their office, and a few other places as well. And it's really strong, like somebody's standing right next to you smoking a cigar. You walk a few feet away, you can't smell it anymore. And it's always, once again, really early in the morning or late at night when there's nobody else around. We've usually been closed for several hours, so there's no way that it's coming in through the windows or that somebody had been standing there smoking, because smoking's not permitted in the buildings anyway.
Directly across the street from the Old Town Square in St. Augustine is the famous Potter's Wax Museum, where unrivaled skilled craftsmen forge uncanny recreations of notable people from the past. Though fascinating, this somewhat eerie environment can be unsettling as it is, but it just so happens that the museum itself is quite haunted as well.
I'm Peter Carcillo, and I'm the wax figure sculptor here at Potter's Wax Museum in St. Augustine. Now, we've had several strange occurrences here in the museum, and we're not exactly sure why. In this section of the museum where we have a lot of historical figures, this tends to be the creepiest section of the museum. I personally don't like going through here at night after we turn all the lights off because it gets a little scary with all these glass eyes glinting in the darkness. Here is where we've had the most encounters. Just around the corner from where we're standing, we have a small bench. And one night while we were closing up, our gift shop manager went through the museum to make sure that there were no more guests inside. And his wife came back to use the restroom and saw a small boy sitting on the park bench that's near the restrooms. And she said, "You can't close yet because there's still someone in there." And he said, "No, I've already gone through and checked." And when they went to look at our video monitor, there was the small boy sitting there. And this small boy has been seen several times in the museum, after closing usually. And he's also has another ghost who's a man in a top hat. We're not sure why they're here. The only reason we can imagine is that the Spanish military hospital, which was a hospital here in St. Augustine when it was founded, is about 10 yards from this site, just across the street. And of course, a lot of people passed away there. So we don't know if they're just staying close to the hospital or if it was something that happened here before the museum was built. But it's still pretty creepy.
O.C. White's Restaurant and Tavern, originally a home of prominent private residents, is now one of the more popular places in St. Augustine for good food and ambience. But one thing is for certain, and that is that here, the term food and spirits definitely takes on a whole new meaning.
One instance of any spiritual activity that is very prominent in my mind happened not too long ago while I was working here one afternoon. Another employee and myself were in the building. We were in about an hour before opening time in order to set up for the dinner crowd. She was working upstairs on the second floor in the dining room, and I was working downstairs on the first floor. And she came down at one point and asked me if I had an extra candle. Every table that we set for the evening, we put a candle on it because we light them for the dinner crowd. And I said, sure. And I got her a candle and I said, I'll come on up with you. I have to get some stuff from upstairs. As we were walking up the steps, I said, did you light the candles already? And she said, no. And there was a really strong wax smell. And as we got upstairs, she pointed out that the one table that she was short a candle, we looked at the table and the candle was lit and had been put there by evidently the spirit in the building.
While O.C. White's was open one day for business, there were several people sitting at the bar downstairs. And a person noticed a woman slowly walking down the steps. And she was wearing Victorian attire, and they believed it to be a ghost. And she walked right down the steps and right through the kitchen door and disappeared. And that was just one instance.
One night, we were here after hours. We were playing pool in the office. There's a couple of us. I think there's 3 of us. We left 3 stools down at the bar. Well, when we came back down to lock up and go home, there's a 4th stool pulled up to the bar. Another night, we were working in a dish pit. It's about midnight. Me and a couple of my friends were standing back there, and we were kind of egging her on because we wanted to see her. And a box of sugar caddies flew off the shelf on the 3rd floor. It came down the stairs at us.
The old St. Francis Inn, St. Augustine's oldest continuously run inn, is a charming bed and breakfast that has certainly had her share of spiritual activities over the many years of her existence. Activity so great that staff workers as well as guests of the inn have experienced strange interactions with the dead from inside the inn itself.
One of the most commonly asked questions we have here in St. Augustine is which of the bed and breakfasts is the most haunted. Now, several of the bed and breakfasts have their own ghost stories, but when I'm asked that question, my answer is generally the St. Francis Inn. At 279 St. George Street, St. Francis Inn is one of the older buildings in St. Augustine being used as a bed and breakfast. Parts of the building date back to 1791. It's a beautiful three-story building with a lovely courtyard, and there are several ghost stories that are related to the St. Francis Inn. One of them concerns the original owner of the house, who was a Confederate sympathizer. Another is about a Confederate soldier, probably a spy. Many people feel this is the gentleman who is sometimes seen standing in a doorway leading into the dining room area. My personal favorite story about the St. Francis Inn is the Miss Lily story. And if you were to be an overnight guest in this bed and breakfast, you might be assigned to room 3A, Miss Lily's room, up on the 3rd floor. Now, the story of Miss Lily, it seems that she was a beautiful young slave girl, and unfortunately she had fallen in love with her master's nephew. The two of them would often meet up in this 3rd floor attic room, but one day they were caught together. The family was very upset. They threatened to send the young man away to military service. He was so upset, he hung himself in that 3rd floor attic room. Now, there are two versions of the story at this point. One of them is that Miss Lily was sent away from St. Augustine, never to return. The second version of the story is that Miss Lily was so distraught that she threw herself out of that 3rd floor attic room and down onto St. George Street below, also committing suicide. Now, those people who have stayed overnight in room 3A often relate stories of what happened back to me. And it seems that if you were to be a guest in that room, you might want to be very careful what you take in with you, especially if you're a woman and you're carrying a makeup bag. It seems that Miss Lily likes to play with the makeup during the night. One woman awoke to find face powder dusting the entire room. Another woman awoke to find her makeup bag filled with water, and the makeup was floating in the bottom of the bag.
Underneath the cascading Florida Spanish moss of the Huguenot Cemetery here in St. Augustine lie the restless spirits of the dead, both rich and poor alike. One such spirit is that of a young girl named Elizabeth, who fell victim, like so many others, to a horrible and massive yellow fever epidemic that ravished St. Augustine in the early 1800s and took the lives of literally hundreds of innocent victims. Since then, it is said that Elizabeth has been seen just outside the old main gates to the city, and many who claim to have actually seen her say that she appears to be waving her arms in a vain attempt to warn unsuspecting visitors to the impending danger that awaits them, as it did so many years ago. Just a few blocks west of the Huguenot Cemetery is the Talamato Cemetery, one of the most spiritually active graveyards in the city. History reveals a diversity of ethnic backgrounds that are buried here and still walk the earth even today.
There are over 400 bodies buried within that Talamato Cemetery, but there are just over 100 headstones left standing. And I know that 15 of those belong to my ancestors. My family has been here in the city of St. Augustine since 1777. Our ethnic background is referred to as Minorcan, and 1 out of every 10 people that you meet in this community today will be a direct descendant of one of those Minorcan survivors. They were indentured servants brought from the Mediterranean to work on indigo plantations here in Florida back in 1768. And after 9 years of servitude under that contract, they revolted. They expected to be given their freedom and 50 acres of land, and they were not being given their freedom nor their land. So those who had survived managed to come to St. Augustine, and our families have been here ever since. So I have a special connection with the Talamato Cemetery. Many of my favorite stories, ghost stories that we tell to the public, are about apparitions that have been seen within that Talamato Cemetery.
One of the most popular ghost stories inside the Talamato Cemetery is the strange apparition of a woman in a wedding dress, slowly making her way through the headstones. Is she looking for the dead groom she was supposed to marry so many years ago? Or is she just looking for her own final resting place? No one knows for sure, nor will they ever.
Most haunted house in all of St. Augustine is Miss Faye's house. She died 22 years ago, fell down the steps in the middle of the house and broke her neck, died instantly against the front door. Well, she was put to rest and her daughter rented out the house to a young couple that had just gotten married. Well, the very first night they heard voices and bumps and thumps, glass breaking. When they got into bed, the bed collapsed, so they moved out that very night and went to a motel. Next people that moved in were two college students, and again they experienced the same thing in the first week of living there. Bumps and thumps and glass breaking, and their books began to fly around the room when they would study. Well, no one would live in this very haunted house for over 20 years. And finally, recently today, they've been trying to sell the house, but again, no takers. To this day, Miss Faye is seen in the upstairs window. She's an older woman with gray hair, sunken cheeks, and she looks out twice to make sure that you're still there.
Although science and paranormal research is getting closer and closer to unlocking the mystery of how and why these spirits manifest themselves, many average people continue to experience countless actual sightings and phenomenon during their visit here. So if it's fun, food, and spirits you're looking for, St. Augustine is without a doubt one of the best. Until next time, keep an open mind and a keen eye out, and join us for another episode of Ghosts of the East Coast.